Hi, I'm Mark Kirkpatrick, and this is Kirk Art Studio. And I want to talk about how to make a high-quality G-clay print from your original artwork. And this could be any type of flat work, a drawing, various types of painting, pastel. I'm a watercolor artist, so I'll be using that as an example. And I just recently completed this piece, which is called the Stairs of Queen Anne, and got a bunch of videos documenting how I went through that process, creating this one. And it's mounted on a board because I needed that to photograph the work. So there's a couple of different approaches, probably more than just a couple, for creating a digital file that you can use to make reproductions. And one of the most popular is to get a scan from what's called a drum scanner, where the artwork is attached to a big drum, and it moves slowly and is scanned multiple times, and you end up with a high resolution image. And they're very effective, but I found it to be a little prohibitive in terms of cost. Plus there wasn't anything really near me, and I'm the kind of person that, if I can, rather than rent something, I would prefer to buy it. And I knew that I would be doing this often, and so I needed a means, a hands-on method, something that I could do myself. At least that was what I was hoping for, and I think I found it. It's been working for me quite well, and I think anybody can do it. This probably looks complex, but it's really pretty basic. This camera is called a field camera. It's a large format camera. It's 4x5 film size, and it produces a very high resolution piece of film that can be scanned, and using that you can create a digital image. And from that digital image you can go to your printer. Well, I found this one on eBay, and I've been checking, and I saw something really similar for about $300, which is, I think, a very good deal. This one's a Toyo View, but there's a lot of them out there. You can spend a whole lot of money, but you really don't have to, because that $300, if you weigh that against the price of multiple trips to the drum scanner, you'll come out ahead if you're doing this on a regular basis. And if you have a business in art, or want to start one, that's another discussion, but it's really not difficult to do. And then any of this equipment can be expensed. Now, you don't need these lights. I use those for video. All you really need is the camera, some film holders, which look like this, and of course some film, and you're pretty much ready to go. A tripod you need also, but heck, you can pick one of those up at Goodwill. I've got about 3 old ones laying around I'm going to give to Goodwill. This one's nothing special either. They're not really all that expensive. This is a monorail mount, so the adjustments on this camera could be made by sliding the front frame and the rear frame back and forth here, and I'll show you how that works for focusing. But let's talk about the film a little bit. What I use is Provia 100. It's a Fuji film, and you can buy it in I believe 10 sheets for about $50 or 20 sheets for about $90. And the processing is not all that bad either. It's only about, I'm thinking, $2.50 per sheet for each exposure. So this is the size of it. It's in a plastic sleeve. And this has one of my exposures for that painting. And I doubt that that's visible, but you can see the size that it produces. And this is transparency film. It's just like slide film. And sometimes you'll get an exposure that's too thin, or you don't have the richness of the colors or the contrast that you need. So there are some techniques to use to get the correct exposure so that you'll have a piece of film that you can scan and then import into any photo manipulation type software and create a digital file that can be printed. And I try to do as little as possible with that. I want the camera to do the work. I want to take a good picture, and once I have a good exposure, then I don't have to monkey with it. So I want my prints obviously to be as close to the original as they could possibly be. Using this camera has shown me that you can get unbelievable detail. I can see the fibers of the paper in enlargements, and it's really something. I didn't realize when I first started using it that it had that capability. The level of clarity and detail with this method rivals that of just about any digital camera. I shouldn't say any, because there are some that really can produce a super high resolution image, and there's some debate about which method is better. Without a camera back on one of these digital cameras, I don't think the same results can be achieved. So I really prefer this method. A camera back is like a computer that puts your processor on steroids, apparently, and helps create those super high resolution images. Well, scanning this film at a very high resolution does the same thing. Now, I'm not a photographer, and the camera buffs are going to take note, but perhaps I've raised some questions there about which method you should go with, but I just feel like I like to be in control. I like to, have access whenever I want it, and I can take my photos whenever I need to. Saves me running around. The film, however, I do have to mail in for processing, and nobody around me does it. I send it into a place in Portland called Citizens Photo, and they're excellent, and they're pretty quick. So that part isn't a problem. So what do? Well, setting up the camera, actually, I think the best way to learn about how to set it up is to check out a YouTube video. There are several out there about these types of cameras, and it's pretty easy. I didn't have to do much at all with this. All you have to really notice is that you want to make sure that the plane of the front where the lens is held is parallel to the one in the back, and then you can move these front and back standards on this monorail using these knobs here, and it's geared so they slide forward and backward. Pretty simple, really. So what I do is I take my painting and I put it up. In my case, I have a deck with a railing, and I just put it up against this deck, and I check it with a level, and I make sure it's vertical. And then I take my camera and I set it up in front of the painting about 6 feet away, and I make sure that this is pointed directly at the center of the painting. So actually the lens is at the center of the painting. So I take a measurement off the ground and I get the height of my lens, and I make sure it's going to hit my painting right in the middle. Now you don't have to be super accurate with this. You can take a little bit of a wider shot so that you can include more, and then you're sure not to lose any part of your image. So that's the setup, and I just take my photos outside generally on a hazy day. I don't like to do it when there's direct sun, but just a slightly overcast day. It depends on the angle of the light and so forth, whether you have a good shot at that where you are, but you can usually run around and find it, and you'll find a setup that works. I've done this. Actually, I've set it up in the trunk of my cars and put the painting against the trunk and clamped it and put out my tripod in a parking lot because I had good light. So where the light's nice and even and not too harsh, then you can get a really good photo. I'll get back to taking the photo itself, but I want to show you more about this film and what you do with it. So when you get the film, it's in these light tight boxes. These boxes are kind of interlocked like so. You got 3 of them here. So there's the bottom, and you have this one that goes over that, and you have this one that goes over that. So what that does is block out any light, and plus your film is wrapped in foil. And you have to open the film and load the film holders in the dark. Well, that seemed like it might be a problem, but no, it's pretty simple also. You can do it in the evening or dark. I mean, when it gets dark, and block out as much light as you can around. And I just go into the bathroom and shove a towel under the door, and I kind of wait till my eyes adjust and see if there's any major light leaks. And a little tiny amount of light, I mean a very small amount, won't kill you, because you're going to do this fairly quickly. Anyway, when you load the film into the film holder, there's a couple things to know that I will talk about. And that's, they give you notches on here that indicate which side has the emulsion for exposure. And that's important, because I've gotten that wrong before and done all this work and ended up with 0 results because I had my film in wrong. So what you do, you pull this slide out. Now there's 2 sides to each of these holders. These slides come completely out, and what you have then is a slot on either side that the film will slide under, and the notched area on your film should be in the upper right or the lower left. Upper right or lower left. And I always keep it on the upper right because I can feel it. And you slide the film in. Now we're doing this in the dark, but if you practice, or actually after you've done one, it's pretty simple. Once the film's in and you don't feel any resistance, don't force anything, you close this little flap here and put your slide in, and that's called a dark slide, and that locks in the film and keeps the light out. You're going to load 2 sides. There's 2 sides, so we do the same on, here's the other one. Pull that one and slide it back. You don't have to take it all the way out. And grab a piece of film out of your box of film. Find those notches and kind of gently slide it under those 2 rails that are on either side of this film holder, and it just falls into place close that little flap, slide that back, and this is ready to go. So I usually do 3 of them, and I'll tell you why. Well, it's actually 6 exposures. With these cameras, it's fairly easy to manipulate, but they are manual. So you need to know just a couple things. You have 2 controls that are primarily what you're working with, and that would be the time of the exposure. And in my case, I usually go with 1/60th of a second or 1/30th of a second. And it's really easy to adjust that. There's a little deal here. You put it on 60 or 30 or whatever you want to do. And then to get various exposures, I'll take my lens cap off. You can turn here to adjust the aperture of your lens. Oop, I just hit the shutter. That doesn't matter because I don't have any film in it anyway. And so there's 2 controls because this is a manual operation that you need to become familiar with a little bit, and that would be the exposure time, which is in fractions of a second, and I generally go with 1/30th of a second or 1/60th of a second, and those numbers are right here on this dial, and I will put it on. There goes the shutter. I will put it on 30, and I'm going to leave it there for the whole operation. And the other adjustment that's going to help me get these different exposures is the aperture of the lens, and all that is the iris opens and closes based on where this is positioned, and it's called f-stop. Well, there is a wide open setting, and then there's one that's nearly closed. And in my experience, it's best to try and shoot somewhere around f11 or f16 if you're getting the right readings from your light meter. And the reason for that is if you have the aperture wide open, you don't have much depth of field in terms of your focal plane. Your focus is only going to work for a small window, whereas when you shoot at f11 or f16 or higher, that depth of focus widens, and so it allows for, gives you a little leeway in case you're off just a touch with the focusing process, and so it'll help to bring everything into focus better. So how do you know where to start? Well, I've got a couple light meters. These are really inexpensive. These are older ones, and they're very simple. You just put the ASA of the film using a dial. You put the ASA where it's supposed to be, which in this case is 100, and then this is reading the light, and there's a little needle up here, and all I have to do is turn this wheel until it aligns with that needle. And when I get it aligned, it's telling me in this light, in which there's quite a lot of it, that I can shoot at 1/30th of a second at about f-stop 8. So that would be where this little guy comes in. I just put it on 8, and I would probably take my first exposure there, and then I would bracket. Now what that means is try a couple shots above that and a couple below. So I would go from 8 maybe to 11 to 15, and I just leave the shutter speed where it is. Take those exposures, and then I would do a couple lower. So I go down to 8, and it goes to what, 5.6, and this is kind of an infinite dial, so you can go in between the settings also. And when I'm finished, I'll have about 6 exposures, all with a different aperture, different f-stop, and I just leave the exposure speed at 1/30th of a second. I don't play with that. So that's really pretty simple, and I'm getting my information from these, and it doesn't change drastically unless there's a big cloud, and then all of a sudden the sun comes out and everything goes really bright. And even if it does change, you can take your time and get another reading and move to a different position with your f-stop to account for the change in the light. Well, one other little goodie. This is a remote for the shutter, and this allows me to take a shot without actually having to lean over here and touch the camera and move it all around. So it's just a shutter release, and these are very inexpensive. So that's all the gear. Now if we look at the back of this camera, I'll just rotate this around. This is a ground glass where you can focus your image before taking these photos, and you have to be able to see your image within this framework first of all. Otherwise you got to move your tripod around and kind of get everything adjusted so that it's framed well. And then once you've seen it, or you can see it clearly, this is called a jeweler's loop, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And what this allows me to do is get real up close and zero in, and I can see as I change the focus, which is simply a matter of moving the front frame back and forth, and you can see the bellows change. As I move that frame, my image is going to get blurry, and then it'll get sharp and it'll go blurry again, and you just keep working it until you've got the focus that you want. And then there's a little lock, you just lock it there, and you should be ready to shoot. Of course you have to load your film. What does that look like? It's really simple. This ground glass thing is spring loaded, and it's built to accept these film holders. So I drop it in, but I still have that dark slide inside, so I have to remove the one that's going to be exposed, which is in the front there. So I'll pull that out, and I don't know if I set my shutter. I guess I did. Once I have everything the way I want it and I'm aimed properly, I can see my image and I've focused it. Take my exposure. Okay, then what? I need to replace this because this keeps the light out. So I slide this back in. Okay, and then since there's two on each of these, I flip it around, and I'm going to change the aperture, just a little bit, so that I get a slightly different opening to the iris, to the camera, allowing the light in. When that changes my f-stop just a bit, I'll have a slightly different amount of light coming in for the next exposure. Now you can go up and down, as I mentioned. I would pick a number based on your light meter, then I'd go a few stops above and a few stops below. And that way you get a range. And one of those is going to be right on. And you probably won't see it until you actually scan the film. And I'm going to be talking about how to do that. But that's going to be another video, one after this one. So that's essentially all that you need to do to get a good shot of your art. It's all in the preparation, of course. You want your artwork to be mounted on something that's going to hold it vertically, and you want to have your camera in a position that it can be on level ground, and you're right in front of it, and you make sure that your lens is going to be centered on the art. Now, of course, all the tripods have adjustable legs, so you can raise it up and down whatever's needed. If we didn't go this route and we were trying to do this work with a real high-end digital camera, you'd still have to have a copy stand to hold your art. You would need lights above and beyond what I have, and you have to get the correct color temperature from your lighting. And I've done some copy work. It's not simple. There are some places you can go that will perhaps do it for you for a charge, like maybe a college or university that has a good photography department. Sometimes they'll do it. But other than that, you would be going to a print shop and just paying the going rate. And I really don't know what that is, because I've been doing this for so long that I've lost touch with a lot of things. But at any rate, I think it's kind of fun. You can't be intimidated by the camera because it's really just a box camera. It's almost like the old pinhole camera where you put film in the back of a shoebox, make a lens out of foil, and just put a little pinhole in the front and create a pinhole camera. I mean, there's more to it than that, but obviously the principle is the same. Now this one has, as I mentioned, is Toyo View. Lots of good cameras out there, and you can go up, or I don't know, I think this is on the inexpensive side. The lens is good. It's a German one. Don't know a heck of a lot about it. I just know that it works. And if you need a lot more information about this kind of photography, there's a really good website, largeformatphotography.com, and they have a forum, and you can get as deep into it as you want. And there's also, of course, YouTube videos about how to work with these. So I don't think it's any more difficult than the old film cameras that everybody used to have prior to digital. It's just there's more steps. Okay, I've got my film exposed. Now what? Well, I'm back into the dark, and for that I'm just going to make sure everything's sealed up and dark enough, and then I can slide this out. And I've got the wrong one because it's still in here. I'll slide the dark slide back, throw this little door open, and just get a fingernail under here, which, do I have a fingernail? There we go. Pop that out, put it in your box, Flip it over, get your other one, same method. You're going to pull this dark slide and then pop that guy out, and these will go into a little sleeve. It's a paper sleeve. It looks like this. So I put my film into this for a little extra protection against the light. Put them all in fact, and they wouldn't have the plastic at that point. But then I want to make sure I do this correctly. I put the film in this box, put the next size lid on, and then put the other one on. So I've got triple protection there from the light, and you mail it in, and it's kind of exciting to get your film back. So that's kind of in a nutshell how you create the film that can be used in a scanner to produce a digital image. And the equipment needed, I'm using 4x5 a field camera here. It's a monorail style, has this big bar. Almost all of them are have this setup, and it attaches easily to basically any tripod. You need a light meter or two. These are very inexpensive, and I'm sure you can spend as much money as you want on a light meter, but I don't think it's really necessary. You need some film holders, also inexpensive, an eBay item for sure, or you can buy them new. As long as they don't have light leaks, you don't need to buy new. And then you need some film. And one last thing, this guy, which ultra cheap, for focusing on the ground glass back of your camera, and you get up close and personal and zoom in on your subject. This can be picked up just about anywhere also. Probably even find some of these at a Goodwill. I'm not sure, but it's a possibility because everything else is going there. Well, that's it for this one. I hope you aren't afraid to try this, because if you're going to make reproductions and high quality reproductions from your art, then this is a really inexpensive method versus handing it off to someone else to do all the scanning and producing the file. How many times? It depends on how much art you produce and how much of it you want to create, use to create editions. And since I'm doing 40 or 50 paintings that I need to create editions from, I like to have this accessible. I like to have it where I can grab it and go. So I'll see you on the next one, which will be a discussion of how to scan the film and then what happens after that. Thanks.